Hi there, everybody. It's 4 o'clock in New York. In the second Trump administration, telling the truth can get you fired. Brand new reporting from the Washington Post, breaking this afternoon, reveals that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has fired the #1 and #2 officials at the National Intelligence Council, weeks after the council published an assessment that all but demolished Team Trump's legal rationale for mass deportations. From that report, quote, Gabbard removed Michael Collins, the acting chair of the National Intelligence Council, as well as his deputy, Maria Langdon-Ryckoff. That's according to a spokesperson for Gabbard's office. The firings took place 1 week after the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a partially declassified intelligence assessment dated April 7th and produced by the National Intelligence Council. That assessment found that the Venezuelan government is most likely not directing the activities of the gang known as Tren de Aragua or facilitating its operations in the U.S. A reminder, this assessment said this, quote, while Venezuela's permissive environment enables TDA, Tren de Aragua, to operate, the Maduro regime probably does not have a policy of cooperating with TDA and is not directing TDA movement to and operations in the U.S. Statements like that are very inconvenient for the Trump administration. In invoking the Alien Enemies Act on March 15th, the Trump administration said in an executive order this, quote, TDA is undertaking hostile actions and conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the U.S., both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. That was the entire justification for using the Alien Enemies Act in the first place. The Alien Enemies Act was used only 3 times in American history, and the Trump administration is using it to deport migrants without any semblance of due process being given to them and then sending them to a notorious prison in El Salvador. With their justification for using the AEA, Alien Enemies Act, blown to smithereens by their own government, the Trump administration, instead of backing down on the deportations, has instead started a crackdown on the fact finders and the truth tellers in their own intelligence community. The New York Times reported last week that in the wake of its own reporting on an initial assessment back in February, quote, the Justice Department opened a criminal investigation and portrayed the reporting as misleading and harmful. The administration doubled down a month later after similar coverage in the Washington Post, citing the disclosures in both articles as a reason to relax limits on leak investigations. Now, the firing of the #1 and #2 officials at the National Intelligence Council sends an unmistakable message. The ranking member of the House Intel Committee, Congressman Jim Himes, tells the Washington Post this, quote, absent evidence to justify the firings, the workforce can only conclude that their jobs are contingent on producing analysis that is aligned with the president's agenda, rather than truthful and apolitical, end quote. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Washington Post national investigative reporter Carol Leonnig is here. Also joining us is former CIA director, now MSNBC senior national security analyst John Brennan. Director Brennan, I'm actually going to start with you because I believe you know these officials. Let me just tell our viewers a little bit about the folks who have been fired, purged from the federal government. Collins has spent 3 decades in the intelligence community, has served as chief of staff for the CIA's deputy director, starting his career as an analyst focused on East Asia. Langdon-Ryckoff has also served more than 30 years, has more than 30 years experience in the intelligence community, including as an expert on the Middle East. The ODNI previously listed her as an exceptional analyst. She also previously served as director of the Strategic Futures Group at the National Intelligence Council. Seasoned, apolitical, proven, trusted intelligence officials fired today by Tulsi Gabbard. Director Brennan.
Yeah, this whole thing just makes me livid. It's appalling and outrageous and demonstrates why Tulsi Gabbard never should have been confirmed as Director of National Intelligence. Michael Collins and Marie Langdon-Ryckoff are 2 of the most experienced, accomplished, and talented analysts in the entire U.S. intelligence community. With over 60 years of combined experience, they have worked for successive administrations since the 1990s. They have demonstrated time and time again their capabilities, their competence, their integrity, and they have served as role models for a generation of intelligence officers inside of CIA. They're CIA officers by background and by training. And this is going to have real reverberations within the workforce because, as Congressman Hines pointed out, it's clearly a signal to tell analysts throughout the intelligence community, you tell the truth, you provide objective analysis as you're supposed to be doing, you are running the risk of getting fired. And Michael and Maria are really the quintessential analysts that you want to have providing insight and information and analysis to policymakers so they make the right decisions for U.S. policymakers. But this is a very tangible example of such dangerous and insidious corruption within the Trump administration. They are now manipulating the instruments of government that are used to keep this country safe. And again, the sacking of these two individuals, the very competent and capable officers who have been revered by a generation of intelligence analysts within the agency and across the community because of their accomplishments. This again sends a very clear and chilling signal to others that this is a new day. And if you're going to carry out your responsibilities professionally, with competence and with integrity, you are going to be in the crosshairs of this administration. Absolutely appalling.
Director Brennan, I wonder if you can pull the curtain back a little bit for me on the conversations happening among former intelligence officials, because I know in the transition from my own reporting that there was grave concern about the folks that had been anywhere near any collection or analysis around Putin and Russia going back to the first Trump term and through the Biden years. But what these firings exhibit is that if the intelligence community isn't complicit in manufacturing rationales for invoking the Alien Enemies Act, which is something that is now snarled up in the courts, and the intelligence products are likely to be used as evidence to fight the invoking of the Alien Enemies Act. I mean, facts are facts. And where the Trump administration is running into the wall of facts really isn't in Congress, where the Republicans don't seem to care. It isn't among their base, which so far hasn't rejected Donald Trump. And it isn't anywhere that we can see other than when they are in court. And I wonder what it portends that two senior intelligence officials have been fired because the intelligence product didn't support a false rationale for invoking the Alien Enemies Act.
It portends real danger. Intelligence professionals, both those currently serving and those who served and are retired, were very concerned about the selections for individuals at the top of the intelligence community and across the government. But we had great confidence that the intelligence professionals would fulfill their responsibilities to make sure that they told truth to power. But now with this action, it demonstrates that those at the top of the intelligence community can terminate individuals. We have already seen it at CIA in terms of the termination of individuals who are working on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Even though they may have been reassigned to other positions, they are being terminated. They are being condemned. And so it shows that people like Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, and others can really take actions that's going to undermine the capabilities and the integrity of that intelligence community. And so this is something that I think we're all very worried about. And it also, again, I think it reflects the sense that's coming from the White House that people have to get in line, that there's a sense that there needs to be fealty to Donald Trump. And if you're not going to genuflect at his altar, you're going to see the door. And when it starts hitting the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, the diplomatic community, and the U.S. military, I think we're really in for a very, very dangerous time.
While President Trump is facing a scandal that's overwhelming this first foreign trip of his term, total condemnation for the bid to get a $400 million jet from Qatar. Conservatives rebuking it as a blatant grift. Elected Republicans opposing this and really trying to duck what they see as obvious political blowback for something they want no part of. Democrats blasting it, of course. And then many ethics and nonpartisan experts agreeing this is actually numerically the worst attempted corruption in the history of the White House. Those are just some of the headlines battering Trump during the trip as he lands today in the country offering this controversial and possibly illegal gift, Qatar. And in one sign the entire plan might already be on the rocks, neither side publicly addressed this Trump controversy over the plane as he deboarded a different plane. Now, for many Western democracies, Qatar is seen as a pretty extreme and challenging dictatorship to deal with. It runs as an autocratic monarchy. They have crackdowns on human rights, limits on free speech, and of course, the press over there. They fund Al Jazeera, and many U.S. experts view that as partly a tool of foreign influence, sometimes cutting against U.S. interests. They also work with the U.S. military, so it's a relationship that's complicated, nuanced to be sure, but it complicates American interests because this is a regime that does Iran diplomacy, that hosts a Taliban office in Doha. And this is not news to Donald Trump, by the way. Back around the first term, he was blasting this same Qatar regime as what he called a super terror funder. Qatar clearly wants to play ball. Qatar would rather pay money, which it gathers from its resources and people in a system where they have no accountability. They're a monarchy. They'd rather take that money to buy influence than change any of the policies that the U.S. has a problem with. Indeed, Qatar has been trying to transform its reputation, the Times reports, by spending millions on lobbyists in Washington, including Pam Bondi, now Trump's attorney general. Now, Trump's visit, the Times notes, is a part of this wider success for a very pricey influence strategy for a relatively controversial autocratic monarchy. And their strategy appears to be working. You have this regime trying to buy their way to some sort of better reputation or treatment by the United States. That's the problem underlying the whole jet gift. And it's also why, separate from the ethics, we're not getting an offer of a jet for our politicians from Canada. Qatar has more cleanup to do. And so even apart from the obvious ethics, which should have made this whole thing dead on arrival or not cleared for takeoff, if you prefer, even beyond that, Qatar has faced skepticism from American leaders for its actions on moral grounds and on the normal foreign policy grounds, that they're adverse to U.S. interests. And so here, instead of facing the normal pressure of possibly changing those policies or just paying the consequences, the evidence and the influence campaign suggests what everyone's concerned about, that Qatar is trying to corrupt the United States process from inside, using or abusing money and influence to buy a closer relationship than the facts would otherwise warrant. Now, this is according to multiple administrations and experts that have previously determined that Qatar, at a minimum, should be kept at arm's length, that you don't just embrace a monarchy like this, or you can dial back to the Trump quote I played you, or his own focus on the terror funding. And that was back before all the Qatar money offers were coming in. The facts and the offer from Qatar suggest that this is not about what's best for America. It's about a foreign effort to make Qatar great, to take a turn on the Reagan phrase that Trump rebooted, of course, for his campaigns. And this isn't a new or creative type of corruption to try to make Qatar great. It's actually one of the oldest things in the book. The founders of this country knew that there was always going to be a risk for the United States as a democracy with rotating leaders who don't just hold on to money like a monarchy, that they might someday have people in important positions who were basically weak or greedy. And the founders were worried that weak or greedy leaders could get bought off, could get compromised, even by something so easily and noticeable as blatant as a foreign gift. And so keep that in mind when you remember the Trump family is doing the kind of double dealing with these deals in the exact countries that Trump has prioritized on this first visit. And so to connect the dots tonight, the founders did not leave it up to any one leader to decide when to take gifts. They permanently limited any such foreign gifts in our Constitution. You may have heard reference to this recently given the news this week. And if a foreign country or king, which actually applies given that Qatar is run through a monarchy, if a king tried offering any gift that wasn't, say, for the people or the country of the United States, but was actually just to try to corrupt one person, a politician or leader, the founders were going to ban that or make it very hard to do. The classic example would be France gifting the Statue of Liberty, the beautiful, beautiful statue you see there, for the U.S. centennial. That was a gift to the country, of course, not to any one politician. It is indeed a public statue in New York that many people see still, all these years later, as a great iconic tourist attraction, which they can visit. But remember, even that was approved by Congress. And it wasn't a gift for the politician. As for a king who would try to give a huge gift to an officer or even a president, well, I'll remind you, U.S. officers under the Constitution cannot accept any president from any king or foreign state without the consent of Congress. The founders viewed it as obvious that Congress would never approve big, lavish personal gifts, let alone gigantic ones, and thus that limit meant you would have a check. A rough count suggests the majority of senators today are already on record against this gift plan, when you have the Democrats and several Republican senators who've already spoken out. So it looks like by that whip count, Trump can't even clear this constitutional hurdle, and that's even if his attorney general and former Qatar lobbyist says she likes the idea. So that's the rule. Now, Trump could be pushed to drop this plan from all of the blowback before it's even tested in court. It is still significant because it shows you where his priorities are. It shows you what he's trying to do. It shows you in the clearest possible sense that this personal enrichment matters more than what the U.S. might get. Again, if you use the Statue of Liberty example, why not give the $400 million if it's for the taking to some public project? Why not? Because it's not about you. It's not about the oath he took. It's clearly about him. And because, as I mentioned this in our coverage here, because of the fact that it's so physical and visible and it's a jet, it seems to be having more blowback, especially among Republicans, than other self-interested maneuvers, certainly more than the cryptocurrency, which feels kind of, hard to track. For his part, Trump has defensively argued that taking foreign gifts is, he argues, somehow, quote, smart. Well, the Constitution, the U.S. military, the CIA policies, they all disagree. If you're defending the United States, if you're a general or a CIA spy, it's not considered smart to pocket the gifts, which, by the way, are obviously offered in all sorts of ways, and which tough, strong public servants are supposed to resist, because you don't want to be compromised. Trump is now arguing that the Gulf states have bigger planes, maybe greater planes, and he wants the U.S. to kind of keep up, he says, even if that means having what would become the first ever Qatar Force One, if you will. This really is his argument. It's his new talking point in an interview where even Fox News felt the need to bring up the scandal.
When you land and you see Saudi Arabia and you see UAE and you see Qatar and you see all this, and they have these brand new Boeing 747s mostly, and you see ours next to it, this is like a totally different plane. It's much smaller. We're the United States of America. I believe that we should have the most impressive plane.
Yes. We've gone from what the rules are to the self-dealing to the sort of general statement that we should have the most impressive plane. First of all, if you think about what's been going on with inflation and the prices up and the tariff war, we don't see a lot of evidence that most Americans are thinking about who has the larger plane when they land in various foreign capitals. Second of all, if you want a bigger plane, you run the United States. You can go down to Congress and get that legislated. You can do it without any national security or espionage risk. It's a classic Trump deflection where he starts trying to get people to talk about that and the size of planes instead of the real issue, which is you have a leader who 110 days in has been busy doing business deals with these very countries, making money with his family, selling a meme crypto coin that came out of thin air, getting transaction fees off that, working with the richest guy in the world, Elon Musk. Seems like a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with your life, your well-being, and how your economy is affecting your life and family. Now, this Trump jet, if you are keeping track, would dwarf literally every type of little gift that any president has ever taken, which, as you can see, are down to the tune of a couple $100K for Biden, Bush $1 million. A lot of those things are held in various public presentation areas. None of them involve a $400 million gift. NBC also reports that there'd be a high cost to getting this thing done. So when you take it all together, You don't choose when you follow the news and politics. We don't get to choose which issues break through. Indeed, there are people who are critics of Trump and human rights experts and Democratic activists who say, of all the things in these first 110 days, this is where we've heard more from Republican senators more quickly than picking up students off the street and allegedly appearing to target people based on their free speech and at times sending people to the wrong foreign prison and feeling like, what is due process in America anymore? Even to just name one bundle of issues. We're talking about the jet. But here's the thing. We don't choose. We live through it together. And certain people have certain reasons why they're more skeptical of Trump on this, that, or the other thing. It is very clear from the Republican response and the outrage and what now looks like an effort by Donald Trump to get out from under parts of this. This one broke through because of the sheer, blatant, physical, undeniable grift.
Somehow, in the age of Trump, the plane might actually be just the second most corrupt deal he has cooking with the Gulf nations. I mean, you may remember that one of the Trump family's new money-making schemes is a Trump-branded cryptocurrency. Earlier this month, an investment fund backed by the government of the UAE announced that it would be using the Trump family's cryptocurrency for a $2 billion investment, propping up Trump's cryptocurrency and essentially channeling millions into Trump's family business. And then today, on the current Air Force One that Trump is somehow coping with, he was asked about that scheme, understandably. But Mr. Art of the Deal, you can see him there, conveniently said he knows nothing about it.
An Emirati government did a $2 billion deal using the Trump digital coins. How did that deal come about?
I don't know anything about it. I really don't know anything about it, but I'm a big crypto fan, I will tell you.
What's that you say about the Emirates paying my family? I don't know anything about it, but I love crypto. Big fan. Now, this whole deal seems like the kind of thing that would, in most circumstances, pique the interest of Republicans in Congress. I mean, really anyone in Congress. After all, Republicans spent years crowing about alleged foreign business deals of the so-called Biden crime family, as they deemed it. I mean, a $400 million plane plus a $2 billion crypto deal from the governments of countries in the Middle East does kind of make all of that seem like small ball, but that aside. That's to say nothing of Donald Trump's other cryptocurrency scam, selling access to the president for anyone who invests in his meme coin, including foreign interests. They're included too. Noted crime hunter, of course, Mike Johnson, surely has an opinion about that, right? He must.
Investment in the meme coin, those folks are not transparent. We do not know who those people are.
I don't know anything about the meme coin thing. I don't know.
I mean, I would note that coverage of the crypto deals has been pretty extensive. It's all over the place. Everybody's covering it. And yet, somehow the Speaker of the House is blissfully ignorant, doesn't know a thing about it. All right, so maybe all this crypto stuff is too complicated, if I'm being generous, for a simple country lawyer like Mike Johnson. Maybe that's the thing. What about Trump's palace in the sky, courtesy of Qatar? I mean, that is everywhere. Surely the Speaker of the House must have some thoughts on that one, right?
If the president were to accept an airplane from the Qatari government, should Congress have approval over that kind of gift?
Look, I've been a little busy on reconciliation, so I'm not following all the twists and turns of the Qatar jet. I've certainly heard about it. I'm going to leave it to the administration. They know much more about the details of that, okay? It's not my lane.
I mean, first of all, it's not at all very twisty or very turny. It's a $400 million plane from Qatar that experts say could cost American taxpayers $1 billion. And again, it's hard to turn on a television and not see coverage of the plane. But hey, it's on his lane. So, you know, maybe he could ask whoever is supposed to approve presidential emoluments, right? Maybe he could ask that question of somebody. That would be, hold on, let me just check my notes here. Who does that? Oh, right, yeah, the United States Congress, of which he is the highest ranking member. It's literally their responsibility to approve such things. But really, this may be nothing more complicated, probably is, than Mike Johnson taking a page right out of Donald Trump and his administration's know nothing, we know nothing about it playbook. I mean, today alone was quite a day of blissful ignorance on Capitol Hill, quite a day. Because multiple members of Trump's cabinet testified today, facing questions about the very departments they are supposed to be running. But surprise, surprise, they all don't seem to know anything either. I mean, take, for instance, Trump's health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is currently overseeing America's response to an unprecedented measles outbreak. Unprecedented. More than 1,000 people in this country have been infected with measles. More than 3 times the total number of cases than last year. And of course, we're only in May, so it's only probably going to go up. But apparently, that's not the HHS secretary's lane.
If you had a child today, would you vaccinate that child for measles?
For measles, probably for measles. You know, what I would say is my opinions about vaccines are irrelevant. I don't want to seem like I'm being evasive.
Yeah.
But I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice from me.
Do you love how he just seems like he just found himself on a panel? Okay, listen, I hate to agree with RFK Jr. on this one, and I rarely agree with him. Yeah, we probably should not be taking the medical advice of a notorious vaccine skeptic during a historic outbreak of an entirely preventable disease. But that said, he is, of course, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I didn't pick him. Trump did. The Senate approved him. And that job means he's overseeing the entire health apparatus responsible for giving exactly that kind of guidance to the American people. That's his job. But at the very least, he's not a health expert somehow. He should at least know what's going on operationally in his own department, right?
Secretary Kennedy, how many staff have been cut from the NIH's clinical center? I want a specific number.
I can't tell you that now, Senator Murray. What I can tell you is that if you contact my office tomorrow, I'll look specifically into that.
Well, that is not acceptable.
RFK Jr. can't tell you how many people have been cut from the NIH. It's literally his job to know that. And I just want to stipulate, and I think this is an important point, that these hearings happen every budget season. I mean, these cabinet members have weeks to prepare. The hearings are scheduled weeks in advance in coordination with the agencies and scheduling teams who work for the people who are running the departments. None of this is a pop quiz. They're all predictable. All the questions that are probably going to come up, including questions about the very agencies and the budget of the agencies they're supposed to be running. And somehow yet they're totally unprepared. Now, of course, that includes, and don't worry, I wasn't going to forget him, former reality TV star and current Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. He has been overseeing the Transportation Department, of course, for more than 100 days. And yet all he can seem to muster is some bizarre blame he keeps repeating on the previous administration.
We're in this situation because the last administration didn't see to take initiative on the 3,000 controllers short that we were. The infrastructure didn't rot in the last 100 days. We didn't have 3,000 controller shortages in the last 100 days. There was 4 years that came before where nothing was done.
Okay. A couple of points here for Mr. Real World. First, the Biden administration actually passed the biggest infrastructure investment in American history. And while the number of air traffic controllers had been declining for over a decade, the Biden administration actually managed to reverse that trend and increase the number of air traffic controllers. You can see on the chart right there. It's also worth noting that since Trump took office, they've actually done a lot of work in this area. Don't be so modest, guys. They have a lot to talk about. I mean, they pushed out the head of the FAA after he pushed back on Elon Musk, fired the vice chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, gutted a key aviation safety committee, all of those things. Don't ask Secretary Duffy about any of that. He's only been on the job for 114 freaking days. Maybe at day 50, he'll really hit his stride. Guess we'll see. While he doesn't know what's going on in his agency, he sure did know enough to change his own wife's recent flight itinerary so that she wouldn't fly into the glitch-plagued Newark International Airport, something he admitted publicly. But guys, the whole point here is it's the same story at every one of these hearings. It doesn't matter which party is asking the questions. Just look what happened when a MAGA member of Congress tried to lob Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem a softball about whether she agrees with the White House's harebrained idea to suspend due process for immigrants.
Are you open and supportive of this constitutional option to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to keep Americans safe and carry out the president's agenda?
Well, this is something that's not in my purview to weigh in on. This is the president's prerogative to pursue, and he has not indicated to me that he will or will not be taking that action.
I mean, Congressman Crane's not trying to stick it to Kristi Noem, but her response was basically, the White House wants to do what now? Nope, that's not in my purview. Next question. But perhaps the most telling moment in all of these hearings was when Secretary Noem literally had to avert her eyes in order to retain her blissful ignorance. Little backstory here, which you likely remember. But in an attempt to do some damage control, the Trump administration released this photo you can see on the screen of Kilmar Obrega Garcia's hand tattoos, which they claim are secret code that show he's a member of the gang MS-13. Experts have cast doubt on those claims, of course, but the photo released by the Trump administration literally has superimposed little labels over each tattoo that spell out MS-13. It's quite apparent. You can see it on the screen. And Trump insisted those little labels on that doctored photo were actual tattoos, which of course is not true. But instead of answering a direct question about that, Secretary Noem took great, and I mean great, pains today to deny the reality we can all see with our very own eyes.
Is this doctored or is it not doctored?
I am taken quite seriously.
Is it doctored or not
doctored?
doctored?
The importance that the president has given me to do
I understand. Is it doctored or not
doctored? One thing that's important to remember is that every single time a case is built.
Madam Secretary, I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. I have a bull detector. I'm just asking you, is this doctored or not doctored?
Sir, the protocols in the case built against
Can you
Enrico
answer the
Garcia
question?
Were exactly the same.
Madam Secretary,
I don't have any knowledge as to that photo you're pointing to.
Okay, can you
I
take
don't,
a,
sir.
can you show the photo? My question is the numbers and the letter MS-13. Could you look at the photo, please? It's right in front of
Are
you.
you saying Abrego Garcia is not a wife beater?
No, ma'am.
That he's not a criminal.
Ma'am, it's so telling
never
that
a
you won't look at the
mistake
photo.
for him, and we will not be bringing
Was
him back
it
to
doctored or not?
If, in staying here, if
Can you
he
look
comes
to
back
your
the
right
country, he
at the
would be
photo in front of
right
you?
away.
Madam Secretary, can you look to the right at the photo in front of you? Are those doctored or not?
Sir,
is that actually on his hand or not?
This is unbelievable to me that you're focused.
It's unbelievable
on
to me that you can't look at the photo and tell the American
people. I looked at the photo, but I don't have any knowledge as to this photo.
I don't have any knowledge of the photo. Really? It's literally, I mean, it was like here. It was like feet away from her face. She had to avert her eyes not to look at the photo. But no one in the Trump administration seems to know what's going on these days. Or at least they've decided that blissful ignorance is preferable to answering the actual questions. But here's the thing. The American people know what's going on. They've shown that in protests after every day of the week in every corner of the country. And they've shown it to us poll after poll after poll. A recent CNN poll found that voters support trying to bring Kilmar Obrega Garcia back to the U.S. by a 36-point margin. A Reuters Ipsos poll just out today finds that Americans disapprove of Trump and RFK Jr.'s handling of the measles outbreak by a 9-point margin. And a Kaiser Family Foundation poll from last month found that Americans oppose cuts to Medicaid by a whopping 52-point margin. So yeah, the Trump administration may not know what they are doing or pretend they don't know what's going on, but everyday Americans sure as hell do.
Joining me now, someone who spent decades on the front line of the fight to preserve Medicaid, along with other government programs, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont.
Let's start with the characterization there. I thought that was succinct. He calls them cuts. I call them savings. The line that they're giving about these big cuts to Medicaid is that there are work requirements, that there's too many able-bodied people laying around getting free health care. We believe welfare dependency, not work, is the barrier. That's an op-ed from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Mehmet Oz. What do you say to that?
It's nonsense. The overwhelming, we're going to be looking at $715 billion in cuts to Medicaid and to the Affordable Care Act. That means, Chris, that over 13, according to the CBO, over 13 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance. And then on top of that, what the Republicans are proposing is a $35 copayment for many Medicaid recipients.
Right.
If you are making $16,000 a year, you know what? You can't afford that $35. You are not going to go to the doctor. one of the outrageous dysfunctionalities of our current healthcare system is we lose some 70,000 people a year, die, because they don't get to a doctor on time. When you throw 13 million people off of health insurance, when you raise co-payments for poor people, it is a death sentence. Thousands and thousands of low-income and working people will die because they simply will not be able to get into a doctor's office when they need it.
One of the interesting dynamics to me, having covered government health care and these fights for a while, is the kind of recipe Republicans tend to use in these budget fights goes the following. Look, they're taxing you to pay for something for these other people, right? Yeah. And we're going to cut your taxes, and these freeloaders aren't going to be able to take advantage of the system. Right. It's interesting to me how Medicaid has moved from a thing that they could make that argument about easily back when I first started covering politics to something that feels politically a lot more like Medicare. It's something that's people understand how used and necessary it is. Does it feel that way to you, that it has more political power?
I think that's a very, very valid point, and I think that has a lot to do with a couple of factors. Number one, the healthcare crisis is absolutely acute. You have millions and millions of people who even have health insurance, can't find a doctor, can't afford their deductibles to pay when their deductible is high. So you have a crisis right now in Medicaid, which covers some 70 million people, is a lifesaver for those people. Number two, Medicaid provides about 60% of the funding for nursing homes. So you have a mom or a dad in a nursing home where you need to put them in a nursing home, that's Medicaid. And thirdly, Medicaid provides substantial amounts of money for community health centers. 30 million people go to community health centers. You need that primary health care. Medicaid is there. So Medicaid is playing a role like Medicare in providing care to millions of people. The average American does not want to see it cut.
So you've got, Josh Hawley saying don't cut Medicaid, although it looks like they're going to give themselves wiggle room, right? They're going to define them as things that aren't cuts. And then I want to play you something. Ron Johnson, Republican colleague in Wisconsin, he's been saying this thing's doomed to fail. It's not going to get enough support in the Senate. I'm not quite sure what he's at. He seems to be thinking they're not cutting things enough. But I want to play this for you and get your read on how much this is a bluff and how much this is real. Here's what he had to say.
He only has so much time. But again, I don't want to undermine his strategy because unlike others who are hoping he fails, I hope he succeeds. I hope he succeeds spectacularly. I hope all my concerns are alleviated. But again, so that's why my primary focus is spending. But we can focus on the thing we can do, which is we need to reduce spending to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, and we're not doing that.
Johnson said basically, we're not cutting enough spending. I'm not going to vote for this. Right. I've got a bunch of other Republicans who won't. I tend to think that's talk is cheap, but what do you think about what's going on here?
I think you're right. At the end of the day, Trump's pressure on them and Musk's money on them, if they don't support it, they're going to get primaried, and Musk has unlimited amounts of money to spend against them. I think that will likely prevail. But the idea that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, in a bill which we're going to provide $660 billion in tax breaks for the top 1%, the idea that we're not cutting programs for working people and poor people is absolutely asinine.
You have been on this tour. You've been talking about this a lot with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, the Fight Oligarchy Tour. You've put out, crazy numbers of people. Over 10,000 in Denver and folks in...
No, 34,000 in Denver, as a matter of fact.
Sorry. Thanks for the correction. I was just pulling that from back there. 34,000 in Denver. Huge numbers of people. What is it? Have you been surprised by those numbers? And what does it say to you?
Well, look, remember, this is not some kind of presidential campaign.
No.
There is no election, not running for anything. People are coming out in huge numbers because they are deeply concerned and frightened about what's happening in this country, and they want to see Democrats stand up and fight back in a very aggressive way. So, number one, they're worried about the growing authoritarianism of the Trump administration. They're worried about the kleptocracy of the Trump administration, and they're worried about what we just talked about. Massive tax breaks for billionaires, while 60% of our people living paycheck to paycheck and ordinary Americans struggling just to put food on the table. So the American people look at all of this and they say, what the hell is going on? We want a government that represents not just the billionaire class and the oligarchs. We want a government that represents all of us. Let's do it.
Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He's a member of the House Homeland Security Committee, and here with us at the table, David Corn. He's the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst. Congressman, I want to start with Eugene's implicit question there. What do you think Donald Trump was giving up or exchanging in these negotiations?
It's a me presidency that he's running, and as I look at this trip and what he's getting out of it, I see how he benefits. I don't see how Americans at home are going to benefit. Right now, as we speak, Republicans are gutting health care and kicking millions of people off their health care so billionaires can get tax cuts. 401ks have become 201ks. The Port of Los Angeles has 35% fewer shipping containers coming in right now. And so on your grocery store and Home Depot and Walmart shelves, you're going to be able to buy less, but you'll have to pay more. So more than anything, he gets a lot this week, but we all get screwed.
I think that's such a poignant point. And when I'm thinking about the kind of deals that he's made and the folks he met with, the New York Times had some background that they put out today specifically about Ahmed al-Shara. And he is the former militant leader who now leads Syria. And it's worth noting that he once led a branch of al-Qaeda before he broke ties with the jihadist group and sought to moderate his image. The United States has designated his insurgents group as a terrorist organization. And until just 5 months ago, it offered a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to his arrest. Now, Congressman, you have Donald Trump praising this man, saying we have to give Syria a chance. Is it not, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Congress has to weigh in here, if Syria or this group is being taken off of, the sanctions are being lifted and being taken off of the terror, and this gentleman is being taken off the terrorist watch list. Donald Trump cannot unilaterally do that, yet he stood today as if he had the power to do so.
Absolutely. And he has no idea what he's doing. This is foreign affairs. It's not matching on Tinder. And he looks at someone and says, oh, they look tough. They seem like a fighter. So now they're our friend. I mean, that's absurd that that's how he would, conduct, relations on behalf of the United States, that he would just size someone up so quickly, forgetting, past atrocities. And also, just by the way, as he is over there, having all of this, opulence given to him, Two-Doll Donnie is telling American families that they have to cut back on what they consume. And so, again, the American people are not going to be fooled. They're not buying this one bit. And again, at the end of the day, they want to know, what is their president going to do for them? We know what he gets out of this. What do the rest of Americans get?
Two-Doll Donnie. David, I guess for me, the biggest question that I have for you is that, and I remember, a few months ago where presidents really didn't want even the appearance of impropriety, right? When you talk, when you talk to even Donald Trump in the first 4 years, right? There were things that he didn't want to do, right? He's clearly unleashed. Talk a little bit about what this looks like.
Well, I think if you go back to the first term, I think one of the lessons he got out of that was that he left a lot of money on the table. He could have made more. He's made $3 billion so far in the first 3 years of this presidency. And when you ask the question, what is he getting out of what's happening here, it always comes back to follow the money. I mean, he's in a business deal in Qatar with Saudi developers. The Saudis gave $2 billion to the fund of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He's getting a $400 million plane that, if it goes the way it's supposed to go, will end up with his Presidential Library Foundation, which he will have control over. They could even sell it and take the money at that point in time. I mean, it's interesting that a lot of this money is coming from the Saudis and Qatar. It's not just him. Pam Bondi was a lobbyist for Qatar, and she said, this deal is fine. I've written a memo but we haven't seen the memo. Susan Wiles, his chief of staff, she ran a lobbying firm that had Qatar as a client. Steve Witkoff had Qatar buy a $673 million building from him a few years ago. Kash Patel got paid as a consultant for Qatar last year, and the FBI and Kash Patel won't tell us how much money he got or what that money was for. So we have all this money flowing in from Qatar. It's coming into Trump and everybody else, and then they're acting like he's a great statesman. And this is really about foreign policy when it's just about the ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching.
And Congressman, it's not just about al-Shura. It's not just about the Saudi crown prince. It's about the fact that you have Donald Trump, the president of the United States, saying that his reference check for al-Shura was Erdogan out of Turkey, saying, I spoke with President Erdogan. He is very friendly with him. He feels he's got a shot of doing good. I mean, you're talking about a leader who has
Alicia, that's like Jeffrey Epstein saying Harvey Weinstein is a great guy. Like that doesn't cut it.
Especially when the person you are referencing, to your point, has dismantled the rule of law in his home country, has effectively made the parliament in his own country useless, no system of checks and balances, has jeopardized a free press. It sounds a whole lot like the country we live in and the effort that is underway by this president to undermine democratic norms.
Yes, and Erdogan has become essentially an autocratic leader because the four legs that hold up a democracy are gone in that country. That's a check by the legislature. That's a free press, an independent judiciary, and a town square full of people. We've lost the first in America, but we have three legs that have held so far: the courts, the press, and the people showing up. We can't lose another one, so it has to be a cautionary tale. Turkey, they can't be a reference that we're relying upon.
You know, David, it feels to me that I am not seeing a strong American president on this Middle Eastern trip. I go back and I think about when you are crafting a trip for a president or a vice president, particularly their first, trip that they choose to take, right? President Trump did attend the funeral of Pope Francis, but that was a funeral. It wasn't an official state visit, if you will. It was a funeral that many world leaders attended. But when you're crafting a trip for an American president or vice president, the first trip you take, every single thing is mapped out. It's supposed to send a signal. It's supposed to signal strength, relationships. Like there's deal making. There's a lot behind it, and it is kind of like your first shot across the bow to the rest of the world, but also folks at home, about how you are going to purport yourself on a world stage.
But I think you're making a mistake.
Tell me.
I hate to correct you, but this is not a trip of an American president.
Okay, David, I was thinking.
This is the trip of Donald Trump for Donald Trump. And you go back to what we just talked about a moment ago, the reference from Erdogan. The reference also came from MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. He said, you got to meet this guy, you got to make nice with this guy. Trump is doing what he's doing because he wants to do business with these people. And so he's taking their cues. They say he's okay. I mean, it's kind of disgusting. I mean, we referenced this earlier, that he's meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, who U.S. intelligence said when Trump was president, he was involved in gave the orders to kill Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter and an American resident. And it's also, let's not forget, it's not a democracy. It's an autocratic, authoritarian state in Saudi Arabia as well, where dissidents and critics are put in jail without decent trials, and women are still repressed. So he's not dealing with any of that because he's making deals. There's a tower going up in Saudi Arabia. There's a tower or a project supposed to go up in Qatar. That's what he cares about. If Al Capone was around right now, he would say, forget crime, I'm going into politics.
This just doesn't seem, I think you're right. This feels like then, I think more people should be concerned. I do think the American people should be concerned about this because the president is not comporting himself as a president. He's comporting himself like he's still the the head honcho, CEO of Trump organization.
This is a trip for Trump Inc., not for the United States of America.
Congressman, in that vein, then, how do you make the American people care about this, right? If we believe that they should be concerned, how do you, members of Congress, how do folks that are covering the story, how do they make it clear to the American people when eggs are so expensive, when gas is expensive, when they're dealing with, maybe only getting 2 toys this year instead of 30, because all these people are getting 30 toys every year? How do you actually make people understand that this should matter to them?
Yeah. Public sentiment is still working. Look, Trump is an aspiring dictator. He's not a dictator yet. If this dictatorship was complete, Elon Musk would still be overseeing Doge. But people talked and walked with their wallets when it came to Tesla, and Musk is out. Trump caved on the tariffs. And here's a prediction I'm going to make. He is going to cave on this plane because the public sentiment is so outraged at it that he's not going to do it. So as long as the public remains engaged and outraged and they show up, he will continue to cave.
But Congressman, how do you make them care? Because I think that, you and the other members of Congress who care about the Emoluments Clause and understand what it means, how do you get out there? What do you tell them? What is your argument to the American people?
Yeah. So we have to fight on the inside in Congress. And frankly, times like this reveal in Congress and in leadership who should lead and who should leave. And so Jamie Raskin, by the way, he has right now a resolution that he's putting before the floor for a vote that would bring this gift to the Congress for a vote. So we have to show as much fight on the inside. On the outside, I'm going to Republican districts every month and holding town halls. I was in Kevin Kiley's district just 2 weeks ago in Folsom, California. We had about 1,000 people show up there. My colleagues like Jasmine Crockett and Maxwell Frost and others, they're doing the same. So if we show fight on the inside, the public will show fight on the outside. And that fourth leg that I mentioned to you, the public outrage in going to the town square, that can be enough to get us to the midterms, to get a true check on the president with a Congress that will stand up to him.